They told me I was too old for the rigors of travel, too slow for connecting flights, too frail for long walks. So they left me behind to give their dog water, tend to their plants, and wave goodbye from the porch of a home I finished paying for years ago. But the next morning, I found something in the recycling that changed everything, an airline envelope with my name missing. That was the exact moment I stopped being the hired help and finally became a man again. The night before, it had rained, just enough to fill the air with the smell of wet earth and a silent regret. I stood at the end of the driveway, their minivan's taillights getting smaller in the mist, my hand still in the middle of a wave long after they'd turned the corner. My son, Tom, had chuckled as he loaded their bags into the back of the car. His wife, Rebecca, handed me a list of chores in the same way she spoke to their dog. "Once a day, Charlie gets his chicken snacks," she said. "And please, John, remember to double lock the front door. Rome isn't for everyone. You'll be much more comfortable right here." She said it as though she were doing me a favor. Their daughters didn't even bother to roll down the windows to say goodbye. The youngest was too busy recording herself on her phone. I just nodded and wished them a nice trip. I stood in the same spot where I once taught my son how to ride his first bicycle. That night, I gave Charlie his dinner, washed the dishes they had left, and poured myself a tall glass of bourbon. Not to celebrate anything, just to remind myself that I was still capable of doing it. The house felt empty and sterile. Nothing was left of my wife Susan's warmth in the curtains or the hallway. Just a few motion sensors, empty shelves, and a blinking router that pulsed like an unknown heartbeat. I went to bed early, not because I was tired, but because there was no reason to stay awake. They had left me here with their dog, their bills, and a fridge full of pre-made meals, as if I were a housekeeper. Not their father, not the man who had built this life for them with calloused hands and missed holidays. Just a quiet ghost they used to need. The next morning, Charlie barked at the recycling truck. I went out to push the bin to the curb, and that's when I saw it. A white envelope peeking out from a ripped paper bag like a forgotten secret. I pulled it out. It was from the travel agency. 5 boarding passes were still inside. The flight had left 3 days ago. Destination Rome. Tom, Rebecca, Olivia, Sarah. My name wasn't there. Not as a backup. Not even as an afterthought. I stood there, holding the envelope like it was made of thin glass. I didn't feel angry. Not yet. Just a sudden, empty understanding. They never had any intention of including me. All the months of pretending, the conversations at dinner, the vague phrases like, "We'll see," and "maybe next time." They had planned everything long before they ever brought it up. I went inside, put the tickets on the kitchen table, and sat down, looking at them like they were evidence. In a way, they were. I brewed some coffee, the kind I used to drink on the job site, strong, black, and no nonsense. Then I picked up the phone. I didn't call Tom. I didn't want to start a fight. I called the travel agency. A young woman answered, her voice cheerful. I gave her the reservation number printed on the envelope. "I need to cancel these," I said. She paused. "Sir, these tickets were used 3 days ago." "Cancel the return flights," I repeated. Another long silence. "May I ask why?" she said. "No," I replied. I heard her keyboard clicking. "It's done. You'll get an email confirmation." "I don't need it," I said and hung up. My hand didn't shake. That surprised me. I spent the rest of the day cleaning. Not because the house was dirty, but because I needed to take back some control. I folded the clothes Rebecca had left in the dryer, took out the trash, and fed Charlie. Then I opened the closet and found my old Navy duffel bag, the one I hadn't used since Susan passed. Her travel tags were still attached inside. I left them there, a small detail I wanted to remember. I packed a few things: one pair of pants, a sweater, and the blue button-down shirt she always said made my eyes stand out. My passport was still valid, and I was still me. I checked my bank account. More than enough money. I had no debts. And nobody depended on me. At least not anymore. I booked a one-way business class ticket to Rome, with an aisle seat. I didn't bother with travel insurance. The next call was to my neighbor, Brenda. "Going somewhere?" she asked. I hesitated. "Just stepping out for a bit. Can you feed Charlie for a few days?" "Sure thing, John." "Good for you," she said. She didn't ask any questions. That's why I called her. That night, I sat on the same porch they had driven away from. Charlie was at my feet. The wind made the chime Susan bought from a roadside stand in Sedona sing softly. I remember how she smiled when she hung them up. "So the silence doesn't get too loud," she said. I never understood what she meant until that moment. I didn't leave a note. I didn't lock the top drawer of Tom's desk, where he kept his mortgage papers. I just fed Charlie, patted his head, and closed the door behind me. My taxi arrived on time. The airport was busy, alive in a way that reminded me I still existed. I moved through it like I belonged there, because I did. At security, a young officer looked at my ID. "Traveling alone, sir?" he asked. "For now," I said. He smiled, not with pity, just with a simple politeness I appreciated. On the plane, I sat next to a woman who didn't say a word. We just nodded to each other. That was enough. I stared out the window as the clouds rolled below us like a second world. I didn't watch a movie or read a book. I just sat there with my hands folded, breathing the same air as 100 strangers, none of whom knew who I used to be. We landed in Rome just after noon. The heat felt like an old memory. I hadn't felt the sun like that since I was in the Navy. I took a taxi to a small hotel near the Alfama district. Nothing special. Clean sheets, a working fan. The woman at the front desk called me "Sir," and asked for my name. "John," I said. "John Walker." She typed it carefully, gave me a key attached to a wooden tag. I walked up 2 flights of stairs, opened the door to my room, and sat on the edge of the bed. My duffel bag was beside me. My hands were on my knees. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just listened to the ceiling fan spinning slowly, slicing the silence into manageable pieces. From my window, I could see families walking hand in hand, tourists taking selfies, and children laughing. I thought of Olivia and Sarah. The last time I held them on my shoulders, they said I was strong. Now I was just too old for long walks. I changed into my blue shirt, ran a hand through my hair, still mostly there, still mine. I walked to the main square, sat at an outdoor cafe, and ordered lamb and olives. The waiter smiled without rushing me. I ate slowly. No phone. No messages. No one was waiting for updates. The world moved around me, and I didn't chase after it. I just let it pass by like a river I had finally stepped out of. I didn't know exactly what I would do next. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel forgotten. I felt free, and that was the beginning. I am ready to continue your story, rewritten according to all your instructions. Name and place replacements: Greg Tom, Linda Susan, Aiden Liam, Caroline Rebecca, Hector Klaus, Emma Olivia, Lucy Sarah, Frank Carter John Walker, Athens Lisbon, Yellowstone Yosemite, Acropolis Coliseum, Florence Venice, Duomo St. Mark's Basilica, Arno Grand Canal, Uffizi Guggenheim Museum, Ponte Vecchio Rialto Bridge, the Isla Murano Island, Cape May Martha's Vineyard, The search for what was lost. Tom was 7. Susan had saved up for months, putting aside grocery coupons and skipping her hair appointments, just so we could drive to Yosemite. We packed everything into the old station wagon. No air conditioning. Tom complained for about 3 hours. But when we reached the viewpoint, he looked at the valley like it was a whole other planet. "Did you build this?" he asked me. I laughed so hard I couldn't even answer. He doesn't remember any of that. What he does remember is that I once told him to stop crying over a scraped knee. I told him to man up. I guess I did. I thought I was teaching him strength. Maybe I was just passing along the same silence I had inherited from my own father. Maybe the wound was deeper than I ever knew. That evening, back at the guest house, I wrote a postcard to someone who hadn't asked for one. My grandson Liam, the younger of the two. He was quieter, the one who used to draw me robots on paper and tape them to the fridge when they came over. He's 14 now, already starting to forget. I wrote, "Dear Liam, I saw a street performer today who reminded me of you. Tall, skinny, and completely unaware, he was full of magic. The sky here is bluer than any crayon in your box. I hope you're still drawing. With love, Grandpa." I didn't add my return address. I didn't need a reply. I just wanted him to know I still existed somewhere beyond the edges of their busy lives. I didn't hear from Tom again that night, but Rebecca sent a message, just 6 words. "Did you cancel our return flights?" I read it 4 times. The sheer nerve of it, the assumption that I owed them a response. I didn't reply. I just stared at the screen and thought to myself, "You left me behind. I'm just doing the same." The next day, I met a man named Klaus in a cafe near the Coliseum. He was in his early 70s, wore a clean white shirt, and read the newspaper like every word mattered. We shared a small table because the place was packed. He spoke perfect English, though he apologized for his accent. I told him mine was worse. He laughed, told me he used to be a philosophy professor. He said he believed in long walks and short memories. For over 2 hours, we talked about fathers and sons, about the kindness of strangers, about how getting older isn't the same as becoming useless. "They forget we had our wars," he said. "Real ones, inside ourselves, and ones that never made the papers." I just nodded. Klaus understood more about me in a single conversation than my family had in years. That night, I just wandered. The streets were lit up with lanterns and the low murmur of conversation. I walked past a wedding party taking photos in front of a crumbling arch. The bride's father was holding her veil. His hands trembled. I wondered if it was from pride or from the weight of 1,000 unspoken memories. I thought of Susan again. How she once danced at her sister's wedding with her shoes in her hands and her lipstick smeared. She never apologized for being happy. I realized then that I had spent the last decade just getting through my days. Not living them, not claiming them, just folding them neatly and tucking them into other people's needs. Back in the room, I opened the nightstand drawer. My passport was sitting on top of the Bible. 2 books that told stories about men who were once lost and then found again. I opened the passport and touched the photo inside. The man staring back was older, with more lines on his face and eyes that were a little less bright. But he was still there, still standing, still able to move forward. I closed it and put it back. Then I opened my phone and drafted a message. Not to Tom, to Liam. "One day, when you're old enough to understand, ask your dad why Grandpa missed that trip to Portugal. Then ask him who stayed behind." I didn't send it. Not yet. Some truths have to ripen before they can be told. In the morning, I bought a train ticket. Venice, then maybe Lisbon. I didn't know how long I'd travel. I didn't know how far I'd go. But I knew one thing for sure. I wouldn't be returning to the same porch they left me on. Not until I knew the man they left behind wasn't the only version of me that still existed. I ironed my blue shirt, polished the shoes I hadn't worn since Susan's funeral, looked in the mirror, and straightened my shoulders. Not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because I remembered how it felt to carry myself like a man whose presence meant something. For years, the world had gotten smaller for me, with labels, with assumptions, and with polite little dismissals. But now, with every step I took, I felt something else growing: room. Space for my name, my voice, and my own damn story. And I planned to write it, one train ride at a time. The train to Venice left just after 8 in the morning. The platform was quiet, with a few travelers shifting their weight from foot to foot and sipping coffee from paper cups. I didn't bring much, just the same navy duffel, a thermos of strong Greek coffee, and the quiet momentum of a man who was no longer waiting to be remembered. The train pulled in, with a sigh of brakes and steel. I stepped aboard without any ceremony. I didn't take a photo or send a message. I just found my seat, got comfortable, and watched the world become a blur outside my window. I had never been to Venice, but Susan had. When we were first married, she spent a semester there, studying art history, eating gelato, and sending me scribbled postcards that I kept in a shoebox under our bed. She used to tell me how the light felt different in Italy. I never understood what she meant until I saw it for myself, streaming in through the train window like something sacred. Venice greeted me with a kind of quiet beauty. Narrow streets and old stone. I checked into a modest guest house near the Grand Canal. The elevator groaned to the second floor. My room smelled of lemon soap and history. The window opened onto red rooftops and clotheslines. It was the kind of view Susan would have taken a picture of. I stood there for a while, just listening to the city breathe. I didn't have a plan. I didn't need one. I walked slowly, not because I had to, but because I finally could. Past bakeries, past bookstores, past small courtyards where locals read their newspapers without looking up. I wasn't a tourist. I wasn't trying to check anything off a list. I was just learning how to be in a place where no one knew my name. That afternoon, I sat in the shadow of the St. Mark's Basilica with a sandwich wrapped in wax paper and a bottle of water. Pigeons gathered at my feet. A street violinist played something slow and sad that I didn't know the name of, but didn't want to forget. I thought about Tom, about how his life had grown so fast that it no longer had any space for where he came from. About how I had once told him that family was the one thing you never walked away from, even when it got heavy. And yet here I was walking, not out of anger, not even out of pain, just a slow, steady reclaiming of everything I had let them take away from me. At dinner, I found a little restaurant tucked behind a flower shop. No menus in English, no glossy signs, just a black chalkboard and a tired waiter who smiled with his eyes. I just ordered whatever he pointed at. It was perfect. I ate alone, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel lonely. I felt whole, complete. The next morning, I went to the Guggenheim Museum, not because I cared about paintings, but because Susan would have wanted me to. The halls were full of tourists with cameras and guidebooks, shuffling from room to room like ants following a sugar trail. I moved more slowly. I stopped in front of a Pollock and tried to see what Susan saw. The wildness, the suggestion of motion, the way beauty sometimes arrives in a splash of chaos with no warning. I stood there until my knees ached. Then I sat down. And while I was sitting, a little girl no older than Sarah dropped her phone and didn't even notice. I bent down to pick it up. Her mother thanked me, barely even looking at me. I watched them walk away, loud and oblivious. I wondered if that was how I looked once, too busy living to notice the people carrying the weight behind me. That evening, back at the guest house, I found a folded note slipped under my door. It was from the innkeeper's daughter. Her English was a little rough but clear. Mr. Walker, thank you for being a quiet guest. My father says you remind him of someone he loved. I don't know who, but he smiled when he said it. I read it twice. Then a third time. I left a note back. Tell him thank you. The next day, I walked across the Rialto Bridge. Jewelry stores lined both sides, each one with more expensive things than the last. I didn't go in. I didn't need anything. But I watched an older couple holding hands as they looked around. The woman wore a bright red scarf. Her hair was silver and cut short. She laughed at something he said. He didn't speak, he just looked at her, as if she were the only reason the light existed. I followed them, not closely, just enough to keep them in sight. I wasn't jealous. I wasn't even sad. I was just observing, a reminder of what it looks like to be chosen, over and over again. I wrote another postcard that evening. This one to Olivia. Dear Olivia, I saw a girl today who reminded me of you. Sharp eyes, a quick mind, and walking with a purpose. I hope you're still drawing. The world needs your straight lines. With love, Grandpa. I didn't send it. I placed it on the nightstand and watched it stay there, quiet and weightless. That night, I got a call from an unknown number. I didn't answer, but the voicemail that followed was from Rebecca. Her voice was strained. John, we got to the airport and found the return flights were canceled. We thought it was a mistake. Then Tom remembered the envelope. Did you do this? Please call. The girls are upset. Tom is furious. I don't know what's going on, but please. She sounded less angry than I expected. She sounded more scared, like someone who had realized too late that the scaffolding they were leaning on was made of someone else's patience. I listened to it twice. Then I deleted it. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt clean. The next morning, I took a water taxi to Murano Island, up into the hills beyond Venice. The air was cooler there. The view stretched out like a postcard that hadn't been printed yet. I sat under a tree with a coffee and let the breeze hit my face. A boy nearby was trying to fly a kite. It kept crashing into the dirt. His grandfather, I assumed, held the string higher, ran slower and steadier, until the wind finally caught it, and up it went. The boy laughed, and for a second, I remembered something so clearly I nearly stood up. Tom, age 9, on the beach at Martha's Vineyard. The same struggle, the same kite. Susan was clapping from the blanket. I was running in the surf with a tail of red nylon following me like fire. He said I was a hero that day. That was the last time I let myself believe it. Back in Venice, I found a small antique shop tucked between a bakery and a bookstore. The owner was a man named Marco. We talked for over an hour about old timepieces, about silence, and about how the past always leaves a mark, even when the surface looks clean. I ended up buying a small brass compass. I didn't need it. I had no idea where I was going next. But something about it just felt right. That evening, I wrote in a notebook I had bought back in Lisbon. You don't stop being a father just because your son stops needing you. But you also don't have to keep waiting on a doorstep where no one ever opens the door. The days moved like honey, slow, warm, and unapologetically sweet. And in that place, I felt something return. Not happiness, not yet, but a feeling of forward motion. And for a man who's been frozen in place for too long, motion is a kind of miracle all its own. My last morning in Venice, I stood by the Grand Canal and watched the sun come up. The water didn't ask where I came from. It didn't need to know what I had lost or left behind. It just kept moving forward, and so did I. I bought a train ticket to Rome. One way, no window seat, just the rhythm of the tracks and the breath of new air. I didn't call anyone to tell them. I didn't ask for permission. I just packed my bag, slipped the compass into my coat pocket, and left the key to the guest house on the front desk with a small note written in my neatest handwriting. I was never on their itinerary, I wrote, but Venice was always on mine. The train ride to Rome was long, about 14 hours, give or take. It passed through stretches of golden hills, olive trees, and sun-drenched fields that blurred into one another like an old painting slowly unrolling. I sat in my seat, with my back straight, window to my left, and the compass in my pocket, the same brass one I picked up in Venice. It didn't always point north, but it felt like something I should carry, if not for direction, then for its weight. I didn't speak to anyone that day. Not the conductor, not the woman beside me chewing gum and looking at her phone. I didn't feel like explaining myself, and Rome wasn't asking for an explanation. I arrived just after dusk. The station was bustling with late commuters and students dragging rolling backpacks across the cracked tiles. My feet ached from sitting so long. I liked the ache. It reminded me that I still had bones and a reason to move. I hailed a taxi from the station and gave the driver the name of the guest house I had circled in my notebook. He nodded once and didn't try to make conversation. That suited me just fine. The city was alive all around us. Laundry still hung between buildings like faded flags. Music floated through half-open shutters. Flamenco, I assumed. Sad, slow, and ancient. My kind of music. The guest house had chipped blue shutters and white tile walls that had seen better years. I liked it immediately. The woman at the front desk wore her hair in a bun and spoke in short, efficient English. "You are alone?" she asked, tapping at the register. I nodded. "For now." She handed me a heavy key and pointed to the staircase. "No elevator this time." That was fine. I needed the climb. The room smelled like sea air and lemon polish. Clean sheets, a desk, a balcony with 2 iron chairs overlooking a narrow square. The sounds from below filtered in, soft voices, a child's laughter, a guitar warming up. I didn't unpack right away. I just opened the doors, stepped onto the balcony, and let the city breathe all around me. I slept harder that night than I had in months. Not because I was tired, but because, for the first time in a long while, I had nothing to explain. No questions to answer, no rooms where I was expected to fill the silence with a cheerful acceptance. Just stillness, just my breath. In the morning, I shaved. Not for anyone, just to see my face more clearly. I wore the blue shirt again. It smelled of salt now. I didn't mind. Downstairs, the guest house offered breakfast, strong coffee in small cups, eggs with edges crisped in oil, and bread that cracked when you bit into it. I ate slowly, chewing like the act itself was a holy moment. No one rushed me. No one asked about my plans. When I was done, I asked the woman at the desk, "Where can I hear flamenco tonight?" She smiled, wrote an address on a piece of paper, and said, "No tourists there, just real people." That afternoon I wandered. No camera, no destination. I passed a bookstore where the window was fogged with titles I couldn't read. I went inside anyway and bought a book in Spanish that I would never understand. I just liked the weight of it in my hand. At a park, I sat on a stone bench and watched pigeons hop between benches, scavenging for crumbs. A young couple danced under a sycamore tree, barefoot, badly, laughing with their whole bodies. I smiled without even realizing it. A small thing, but it felt new. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it. When I returned to the guest house, there was a note slipped under my door. "Mrs. Ursula called," it read. "She is asking if you are safe. She says the children miss you." I folded the note and placed it in the trash without reading it again. They miss me now. After months of side eyes and polite exclusions, After years of being the help in my own legacy, I didn't feel anger. Just a kind of worn-out patience. Like I'd waited too long for an apology, and finally realized it wasn't coming. That night, I walked to the flamenco bar. It wasn't far, just down a narrow alley that smelled of garlic and history. The door was heavy, and the sign above it was hand-painted and fading. Inside, it was dark and warm. No stage, just a stool in the center of the room, and a circle of tables lit by candles stuck into wine bottles. I ordered a drink, red wine dry, and found a seat in the back. She walked in 30 minutes later. The singer, a woman in her early 70s, maybe more. Gray hair tied loosely, a black dress, simple and proud. She didn't speak. She just sat down. The guitarist beside her strummed a few notes. Then she began, and the room just fell away. She sang of longing, of ships that never returned, of sons who forgot to write, of rooms once filled with laughter now echoing with absence. I didn't understand the words, but I understood everything. My eyes stung. I let them. No one looked. No one cared. That was the real freedom of it. Not being invisible, but being irrelevant to everyone except the part of yourself you'd silenced for too long. After the last song, no one clapped. That wasn't the tradition. We just sat with it. Then the lights came back on, and people rose slowly, carrying their quiet home. I lingered. She passed by my table, looked at me once. No recognition, no flirtation, just a kind of understanding. I nodded. She nodded back. That was enough. Outside, Rome had cooled down. The stones beneath my shoes were slick from the night's humidity. I walked slowly back to the guest house, my hands in my pockets, my scarf pulled tight around my neck. When I reached my room, I didn't turn on the light. I just opened the balcony doors, stepped outside, and watched the city breathe. In the morning, there was another message. This one from Tom. A voice memo. I didn't play it. I didn't need to hear the tone to know what was in it. Confusion, a little fear, maybe a rehearsed apology. But it was too early for apologies. I hadn't left to punish them. I left because I was done asking for a seat at a table I built with my own hands. That afternoon, I bought 3 pastries and took them to the square. I sat on a bench and watched an old man feed the pigeons. One of the pastries I placed beside me, for no one in particular, just in case someone needed it. No one came. That was fine. I wrote in my notebook that night, "You are not a burden just because others grew tired of looking at you. You are not invisible just because they stopped asking you questions. You are not done just because they decided to move on." Rome didn't ask who I used to be. It didn't care that I'd once been a provider, a soldier, a husband. It just let me be a man with worn shoes and a brass compass, and a name that no longer needed to echo to be remembered. I slept with the windows open that night. The wind lifted the curtain like a blessing. Somewhere nearby, someone sang softly. Not for me, not about me, but it found me anyway. And in the morning, I smiled before I even opened my eyes. 2 mornings after Rome, I opened my phone. Not to check for updates from Tom or Rebecca. They had sent enough voicemails to last a lifetime. But because I missed a certain kind of voice. I wasn't looking for an apology. I was searching for something else entirely. There it was, tucked between junk notifications and a missed call from an unknown number. A voicemail from Liam. My grandson, 14 years old, still too young to fake concern, too unpolished to perform. I stared at the message for a long time before pressing play. His voice cracked slightly at the start. "Hey, Grandpa. I hope this is your number still." There was a pause, the kind that fills a whole room when a kid isn't sure if he's being brave or just loud. "Dad says you're just off somewhere thinking, and Mom says you're mad, but I don't know. I don't think so. I saw a photo of Lisbon in my social studies book, and I thought maybe you were there. The buildings look kind of like the ones in the postcards you sent last year. I keep those in my drawer. He took a breath, too close to the microphone. I just wanted to say hey. I miss you. I miss talking about rockets and stuff. Nobody listens when I talk about that stuff anymore. I don't think I'm going to go to space camp this year. Dad says it's not in the budget. Another pause. This one was quieter. If you get this and you're okay, just text me one word. You don't have to call. Just something. Click. End of message. I didn't move for a long time. The guest house room was bright that morning. Light poured in from the open balcony door. Liam's voice still echoed somewhere behind my ribs, like someone had knocked on an old pipe in the basement and stirred up the dust. I hadn't realized how much I missed hearing my name without some chore attached to it. Just a boy asking if I was all right. Not what I could fix, not what I could pay for, just if I was still there. I made coffee, strong, hot, and black, then sat on the balcony and stared down at the same square where I'd watched old men play chess and teenagers ignore their grandparents. For once, I wasn't bitter about it. I understood now that life didn't make room for what it no longer noticed. It was our job to take the space we needed, not wait for it to be offered. I thought about Liam, the boy who once asked me, "Do stars disappear when we stop looking, or do they just keep burning, waiting for someone else to find them?" I remembered standing in the driveway with him, a telescope between us, thinking, that was the smartest thing anyone had said to me in 10 years. I pulled out my notebook and flipped to a blank page. I wrote one word at the top, Liam. Underneath it, I wrote a list. Not of things I'd done or things I regretted, but things I wished I'd told him sooner. 1. It's okay to be quiet. 2. A sense of wonder is a kind of bravery. 3. Most adults are scared, too. They just hide it better. 4. Being kind is never a wasted effort. 5. There's no such thing as too much imagination. I stopped at 5, then closed the notebook. I didn't want to write a lecture. I wanted to leave behind something softer than that, something that might grow later. Later that day, I walked down to a small art supply store I'd passed the night before. It smelled like dust and oil and possibility. I bought a small sketchbook, a pack of graphite pencils, and a tin of watercolor blocks. I didn't need them, but Liam might. I wrapped them together with twine and wrote a short note. Use these wherever you go next. You don't need to be good. You just need to be honest. I mailed the package to his school. No return address, just my initials on the back. When I got back to the guest house, I finally replied to his voicemail. No explanation, no lecture, just one word. Still, I didn't expect a response. I didn't need one. But 20 minutes later, my phone lit up. A text from Liam. Cool. Then, did I tell you something? I replied. Yes. 10 minutes passed. Then, I told Dad you probably weren't mad, that maybe you were just tired of being quiet around people who don't hear you. I read that twice, maybe 3 times. I could picture him, legs swinging from his bed, phone clutched in 2 hands, the light of truth just beginning to flicker behind his eyes. I replied, You're a good listener, even better than I was at your age. He sent back an emoji of a rocket ship and one word. Thanks. It was the closest thing to understanding I'd had from anyone in that family in years. The next morning, I found another letter slipped under my door. Same handwriting. The guest house manager again. This time, he simply wrote, Your daughter-in-law called again, said the children are confused. Asked if I could tell you that they're worried. I said you were out walking. She sounded surprised. I chuckled, not out of amusement, but out of recognition. Of course, she was surprised. They thought I had nowhere else to go. Thought I would sit on the porch with the dog, waiting for their return. They didn't realize I had already returned to myself. I walked down to the same square that morning, coffee in one hand, notebook in the other, and sat in my usual spot. A small bird landed on the table and pecked at a sugar packet. I tore it open, sprinkled a bit, and watched it eat. Quiet company. I liked that. Midway through my second cup, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Liam. A picture this time. A sketch. Rough pencil, smudged lines still learning where they belong. It was me sitting on a balcony. A coffee cup, a curtain blowing in the breeze. A notebook open on the table. The details were wrong. The proportions were off. But the heart of it was all there. Underneath he wrote, "This is how I imagine you right now." I stared at it until the screen dimmed. Then I set the phone down and let my hands rest quietly on the table. That boy had done what no one else had tried to do in months. He'd looked for me. Not the version Tom remembered. Not the placeholder Rebecca assigned roles to. Just me. As I was, as I might still be. That night, I didn't go out. I stayed in, sitting by the open balcony doors, the sketch beside me, Rome below, whispering its soft music in the salt air. I wrote again, this time to Liam. "You didn't inherit my silence, and I hope you never will. Speak when it matters. Draw when you feel too much. Love without asking if it's the right time. You've already seen more than they think, and that makes you dangerous in the best way." The next day, I bought a train ticket to Barcelona. The name rolled in my mouth like warmth. I didn't tell anyone. Didn't need to. Liam sent one last message before I boarded. "Tell me what the light looks like when you get there." I replied, "Like something that remembers how to forgive." Then I slipped the phone into my coat pocket, took my seat by the window, and watched the tracks begin their quiet unraveling across the land. I wore the yellow scarf 3 days later, not around my neck, but folded neatly in my back pocket. A bit of color to remind myself I was still allowed to be seen. I wasn't trying to become someone new. I was just trying to remember the man I used to be before I became useful, before I became safe. That morning, I returned to the same cafe by the alley with the peeling green shutters. The waiter didn't ask what I wanted. He just brought the lemonade again and a plate of almonds. I think he understood. Sometimes men our age don't come for food. We come for space, for stillness that doesn't ask questions, for proof that we can still claim the morning as ours. I pulled a pen from my pocket and a wrinkled napkin. I wrote 4 things on it. Susan, Lisbon, Sarah, John. Not as a list, just to see them together, as if by writing them, I could understand why they sat so heavily in my chest. I folded the napkin and placed it under the glass as if it were a quiet promise. That afternoon, I walked into a small bookstore with creaky floors and no air conditioning. The kind of place that smelled of time and glue and sunlight pressed between pages. A young man with round glasses and a faint beard nodded at me. I said nothing. I just wandered until I found the travel section. Not the glossy guides, but the back corner with worn spines and second-hand margins. I picked up a book on cartography. The lines fascinated me. The way someone could name a place just by drawing it, and how someone else could walk there without ever knowing who named it first. That's how I feel now, like I had finally started walking my own lines. John Walker, no longer Tom's dad, Rebecca's father-in-law, the guy who always watered the plants, just a man tracing his map. That evening, I found myself standing on a bridge over the Guadalquivir River. The water was slow, sure of itself. Children leaned over the rails, tossing bits of bread to the ducks. I looked down and remembered taking Tom fishing when he was 12. He caught a single catfish and called it destiny. That was before the phone calls became short, before Rebecca started speaking on his behalf, before I became, "Dad, can you help with the house?" And then eventually just the guy who stayed behind. I exhaled, not in bitterness, just in recognition. That was the past. And the river didn't carry regrets, only movement. Back at the guest house, I opened my email for the first time in days. Not because I missed anyone, but because a part of me was curious. One message stood out. Subject line, "Are you okay?" It was from Sarah. Short, "Mom's mad. Dad said you left without telling anyone. Are you okay?" I stared at the screen, not because of what she said, but because she asked, not what I was doing, not why I did it, just if I was okay. I typed back, "I'm somewhere with music and lemon trees. I think I'm more than okay." I didn't expect a reply, and I didn't need one. I closed the laptop and poured myself a small glass of wine, not to celebrate, but to remember how silence can taste. The next day, I boarded a train to Granada. I liked how the name sounded, too, solid yet warm. On the ride, I sat across from a couple in their 70s, who were arguing softly in Italian. I didn't catch a word, but their hands said everything. He tapped his fingers in surrender. She shook her head with a smirk. Then they laughed. It was the kind of laugh you only earn after years of surviving each other. I envied them just for a second. Not because I wanted a partner, but because I missed the rhythm of having one, the knowing glances, the unspoken jokes, the way Susan used to finish my sentences, not because I couldn't, but because she could. In Granada, I walked more slowly. The heat sat heavier here, but my steps didn't falter. I visited a courtyard known for its flowers, bright reds, burnt oranges, and purples that reminded me of Susan's scarves. I stood there for a long time, just watching petals move in the wind. I didn't take a photo, didn't share it. It was mine. I ate lunch under a fig tree, alone but not lonely. The waiter asked if I wanted dessert. I said yes, because why not? That evening, a message pinged my phone. It was from Liam again. "I told Mom I wished you had come on the trip." She said, "You're too fragile." But I told her, "I bet you're doing something cooler than she thinks." I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Liam, 14 years old, the only one who had ever asked about my Navy days. The only one who once said, "Grandpa, you don't talk much, but when you do, it matters." I replied, "Today I walked where Roman soldiers used to march, and tomorrow, I think I'll go find a flamenco guitar." The next morning, I walked past a shop with a wooden sign and guitars hanging in the window. Inside, a man with silver hair and fingers like lightning was restringing a faded Spanish guitar. I asked if I could buy it. He looked me up and down and asked, "Do you play?" I paused. "Not yet," I said. He grinned. "Then you're the right kind of buyer." He tuned it, handed it to me, and said, "Don't learn it. Listen to it. She'll tell you how." I carried the guitar back to my room like it was a memory being restored. That night I plucked 4 notes. They were enough. They were mine. Days passed. Or maybe they didn't. In places like this, time stops keeping score. I wrote Susan's name on a napkin again. Then under it I wrote mine. Then Liam's. Then Sarah's. I left Tom and Rebecca off the list. Not in anger, just in truth. They had made their map. I was walking mine. On a cool Tuesday, I met an American woman named Heidi at a bookstore reading Final Pages. She was in her 70s, from New Hampshire, with gray curls and a laugh that seemed to echo. She said she came to Spain to mourn her sister, but stayed because the light here made her remember that she was alive. We shared some coffee afterward. She didn't ask me about my past. I didn't ask about hers. We just talked about books and gardens and how old shoes tell stories. She said, "You're not running from something, are you?" I shook my head. "No, I'm walking towards something." She smiled. "That's a lot more rare than you think." That night, I couldn't sleep. So, I took the guitar to the rooftop and played the 4 notes I knew. The stars didn't respond, but I felt heard. Somewhere, Susan would have smiled at that. At dawn, I received a voicemail. It was Tom, his voice sharp and tight. "Dad, what the heck are you doing? Rebecca's furious." "The girls are confused. You just disappeared. This isn't like you. Call me back now." I deleted it, not out of spite, but because it was just noise, static from a radio station I no longer listened to. I sent a message to Liam instead. "If you ever find yourself in Spain, I know a rooftop where the stars still speak." Later that day, I visited a craftsman who carved wooden boxes. I asked for one small enough to fit in a coat pocket. He nodded. "For something precious." I nodded back. "For something real." When it was done, I placed inside it the folded napkin with the names, a lemon candy from the cafe, and a Polaroid Heidi had taken of me smiling under the fig tree. I mailed it to my address back home. No note, just a return label, John Walker. Because someday I wanted to open it and remember the version of myself that had come alive here. I didn't know how long I'd stay. And for the first time, that uncertainty didn't scare me. It thrilled me. I wasn't chasing meaning anymore. I was living inside it. Every cafe chair, every breeze, every flamenco echo in the courtyard wasn't just scenery. It was punctuation to a sentence I was finally writing for myself. And somewhere, deep in the quiet of my chest, a truth settled like dust after a long walk. I wasn't lost. I had simply stopped letting others hold the map. The scarf stayed folded in my pocket for 4 more days. I didn't wear it. Not yet. I wasn't ready for courage, not the kind that showed. I wandered instead, mostly in silence, through side streets and tiled courtyards, past painters sketching strangers and lovers arguing softly in doorways. I kept a notebook in my back pocket, but I didn't write anything. I just held it, as if my thoughts weren't ready for paper yet. I saw things I hadn't noticed in years, not because they weren't there, but because I hadn't known to look. The way pigeons gather near the scent of orange peel. The way old men sit in 3s, never 2s, as if symmetry is dangerous in old age. The way a child touches his father's hand before crossing the street. The smallest moments, quiet but precise, like the ticking of a watch that still works after being forgotten in a drawer. One morning, I took the bus to Granada. I hadn't planned it. I just saw the name on a faded sign near the cafe and decided it was as good a place as any to disappear for a while. The ride was slow, the kind that invites stillness. I watched fields of olive trees blur into hills, their shadows sliding across stone walls like ghosts with nowhere urgent to go. At the terminal, I stepped out into the light. Not just sun, but light. The kind that reveals everything. The cracks, the faded paint, the beauty that doesn't beg for attention. I walked until my knees ached, then kept walking, past fountains filled with coins, past musicians playing songs I didn't recognize, but somehow remembered. I stopped only when I reached a narrow street lined with bookstores. That's where I found a copy of A Farewell to Arms in English, worn but intact, with someone else's underlines in pencil. I bought it, not because I loved the book, but because someone once did. Their thoughts were still in the margins. I liked that, evidence of a life. That night, I read the first chapter in a square where children chased each other in circles and waiters didn't rush you out. I ordered wine, cheap and dry, and I remembered the first time Susan and I drank Spanish Red on the floor of our first apartment, eating stale bread and laughing like the world couldn't touch us. Back then, we didn't know how tired we'd get, how far we'd stretch ourselves for other people's futures, how invisible we'd eventually become. But maybe she knew. Maybe that's why she smiled more than I did, saw more than I could. She once told me, "It's okay to disappear. Just don't stay gone." I never asked what she meant. I wish I had. But that night in Granada, with a book in my hand and the smell of citrus in the air, I understood it. Disappearing wasn't the end. It was part of the process, the reclaiming of self. Back in Barcelona, I got a text from Tom. The first one in 12 days. "Hey, Dad. Everything okay back home?" You haven't replied to Sarah's messages. They're worried. I stared at the screen, thought about responding, but instead I put the phone face down and poured myself a drink. It wasn't bitterness. It was a distance. And distance can be a form of mercy. The next morning, I opened the notebook. Finally, I wrote one sentence. "You left me behind to tend to a life you no longer believed I was part of. Now I'm tending to mine." That was it. That's all I needed. I tore the page out, folded it, slipped it into an envelope, and mailed it. No return address. Just their name and a stamp with a cathedral on it. Maybe they'd recognize the postmark. Maybe they wouldn't. Didn't matter. The point wasn't to sting. The point was to be heard. A week passed, then another. I began to walk with more certainty. I even made a friend, a man named Franz, who ran a bicycle repair shop near the river. He was mostly retired, but he kept the shop open because, as he put it, hands need something to fix, or they start to tremble. He spoke enough English. I spoke enough silence. We understood each other. He offered me coffee one morning, and I offered to help around the shop. Not for money, just for movement. I oiled chains, sorted parts, and listened to stories that came out in pieces. His wife had passed. His daughter lived abroad. We were both practicing solitude, not loneliness, but the kind of quiet that still has shape. One day, while tightening a stubborn bolt, Franz said, "You've got a good way of looking at broken things, like you expect them to work again." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. But inside, something shifted. Maybe I did believe that broken things could be useful again. Not in the way they were before, but in the way time carves new meaning into what's left. That night, I wore the yellow scarf for the first time. Not around my neck, just loosely over my shoulder. Like armor you don't have to announce. I walked past the market, past the alley with the flamenco woman, past the bakery that smelled like honey and sleep. And I stopped by a small art gallery. The lights were dim. The door was open. Inside, canvases lined the walls. Nothing polished, just expressions. I spoke with the curator, a young man with ink on his fingers. He told me the artist was local, had painted every piece after his father died. I walked through the exhibit slowly. One canvas stopped me. A field of rust-colored brushstrokes, violent but deliberate. In the bottom corner, a single silhouette, small, facing away, yet utterly grounded. I stared at it for 15 minutes. Then I asked the price. I didn't buy it. I didn't need to. I just wanted to know its worth. Later in the guest house, I received a message from Sarah. It was short, just a photo of me holding her on my shoulders when she was 6. I had dirt on my shirt, a sunburn on my face, and a smile that didn't look forced. Below it, her message. "I miss you, Grandpa. Mom says you're mad. Are you?" I didn't reply, but I saved the photo and printed it the next day at a shop near the train station. I framed it, set it on the nightstand beside my bed, not as nostalgia, but as proof that I was once real to them, that I existed not as a chore, but as a joy. That night, I sat on the rooftop and watched the sky turn from gold to ink. I lit a small candle. Not for Susan, not even for me, just for the space we lose when we let others define our worth. The scarf moved slightly in the wind. My shoulders didn't ache as much. My chest didn't feel hollow. I thought about going home briefly, then let the thought pass, not out of resentment, but because sometimes healing means not returning to the room where the damage was done. 3 days later, I received an email from Rebecca. Subject, urgent. It read, "We're back. Where are you? The neighbors said you left. The house is a mess. Tom is furious. We trusted you." I stared at the words. Trusted me. After removing me from their travel plans, after handing me the dog like an afterthought, after taking my presence for granted until it disappeared. I didn't reply. But I did do one thing. I forwarded the email to myself, added a note at the top. This is what it feels like to be expected, but never invited. Then I filed it, not for revenge, but for the record. The following morning, I walked down to the bicycle shop early. The shutters were halfway open. Franz was making tea. He looked up and said, "You coming in today?" I said, "Only if you let me try fixing the derailleur." He smiled. "It's yours." That day, I worked longer than usual. The grease under my nails, the sweat on my collar. My hands were steady. My breath was full. I was becoming a man again. Not by reclaiming what I'd lost, but by choosing what to keep. That night, I received another message from Liam. "Grandpa, I saw your picture in a travel blog. Are you really in Spain? That's so cool." I had no idea how the photo got there. Probably from a cafe snapshot. I didn't respond right away. I just smiled. Then I wrote back, "Yes, and someday maybe you'll join me, but only if you bring your own shoes and carry your own bag." He sent back 3 emojis, a plane, a heart, and a thumbs up. I turned off the phone. I let the night settle. The scarf was still warm around my neck. The window was open. The breeze was real. The silence was earned. I didn't tell anyone I was headed to Malaga. I just woke up before the sun, tied my shoes, folded the yellow scarf into my breast pocket like a quiet declaration, and boarded the early train. No itinerary, no plan, just a city I once heard my wife mention in passing, back when we still made lists of places we'd visit when things calmed down. Things never did calm down. Life just got louder, and then it ended. But I remembered how her voice softened around the word Malaga. That was enough of a reason. The train ride was soft and silver, slicing through olive groves and golden hills, like a dream that refused to fade. A little girl sat across from me, watching cartoons with one headphone in and the other out, letting me hear bursts of laughter in a language I didn't speak but still understood. Her mother dozed beside her, head leaning toward the window, and I wondered if she, too, had a father somewhere left behind with promises and errands, holding a leash instead of a suitcase. I didn't envy her. I didn't pity her. I just watched the hills roll by and imagined Susan sitting beside me, pointing out the things I'd miss if I blinked too long. When the train pulled into Malaga, the heat greeted me like an old dog, heavy, loyal, and uninterested in apology. I stepped into the city and let the noise guide me. Bells rang from a nearby church. Vendors peddled fresh oranges, almonds wrapped in paper cones, and fans painted with colors that hurt your teeth if you stared too long. I bought nothing. I didn't need souvenirs. I needed breath. I needed proof that I could still exist outside the architecture of usefulness. By noon, I found a park with a bench under a crooked cypress. I sat, not because I was tired, but because it was mine for the taking. A couple passed by, maybe in their 70s, laughing at something private. He brushed a crumb from her cheek. She swatted his hand away and kept walking. I watched them go, remembering how Susan used to do the same to me. I hadn't thought of that in years. It didn't sting. It just rested inside me, like the way warm stones do after sundown. My phone buzzed. I let it ring. It was Tom. The second time in 3 weeks. The first was a text that said, "Everything okay?" I never replied. This time he called. I watched his name fade on the screen like a vanishing offer. Then the voicemail. I didn't listen. Not yet. I wasn't ready to translate his guilt into something manageable. Not when I could hear birdsong and the rustle of linen from passing skirts. Not when the city still smelled like baked earth and jasmine. I wandered into the old quarter, where the stones whispered in languages long dead. A shop caught my eye, filled with leather-bound notebooks, ink pens, and maps so old the countries didn't match the ones I knew. I stepped inside. The man behind the counter looked up, nodded once, and returned to his book. I ran my fingers across the spines of journals, each one blank but heavy. I bought one, not because I intended to write, just because the weight felt honest. That night, I stayed in a small inn with a cracked window and a fan that clunked in rhythm with my thoughts. I opened the journal, stared at the page, and wrote only 4 words. I am truly here. Then I closed it. That was enough. The next day, I boarded the train back to Barcelona. The city folded me into itself like I hadn't left. That's the thing about places that don't expect anything from you. They welcome you without noise. I stopped by the same cafe, nodded to the same waiter. He smiled like we'd known each other for years. I didn't tell him where I'd been. He didn't ask. We shared the silence like good men do. That evening, I got an email. The subject line read, "Urgent, return flights canceled." It was from the same travel agency. Someone had noticed, probably Rebecca. Her tone in the message was thinly veiled panic. "John, we're in a bind here. Please call. We need to resolve this." I closed it. I didn't delete it, just closed it. Then I opened a new message and wrote something else entirely to Liam. "Ever heard flamenco in the streets? Not a concert. Real flamenco. You feel it more than you hear it. The beat climbs up your spine. Maybe one day I'll show you if you want." I hit send. No reply came that night. That was all right. The next morning, I walked to the river, watched boats pass like silent promises. I didn't miss home. That surprised me. I missed pieces, Max's bark, the chimes in the breeze, the dent in my recliner, but not the whole. The house was never mine after Susan passed. It became a set piece, a museum of routines I no longer believed in. Tom thought he did me a favor by keeping me there. What he didn't see was that he kept me still. I got another voicemail. This one was longer. Tom again. "Dad, look. We didn't mean to leave you out. The agency messed up. We thought your seat was confirmed. I swear Rebecca's been freaking out. Just call us when you can, please." The tone was familiar. The same one he used when he dented the truck at 17. Not quite sorry, more afraid of the consequences. I didn't call back. I didn't block him either. I let the line stay open like a door I hadn't decided whether to close. That afternoon, I wandered into an art exhibit tucked behind a bakery. The sign said, "Portraits of Silence." I smiled at the title. Inside, the walls were lined with photographs of older men and women. Wrinkled hands, sunlit eyes, no captions, no explanations, just faces carrying stories that didn't beg to be told. I stood in front of one, a man sitting on a wooden chair staring at the sea. He looked like he'd waited his whole life for someone to ask what he thought. No one had, but he stayed anyway. I left the exhibit without saying a word to the curator. Some stories don't need receipts. Back in my room, I opened the journal again. This time I wrote more. Do not confuse silence with surrender. Some men speak best by living differently. I closed it, close to my heart. Slept soundly. Dreamed of nothing. Woke up rested. The next morning, a letter waited at the front desk. No return address. Just my name in Tom's handwriting. Inside was a photo. The girls in front of the Parthenon, smiling, young, free. Below it, in Tom's messy scrawl, "Wish you were here." I folded it back into the envelope, put it inside the journal, and wrote one sentence beside it. They don't know what they lost. And I meant it, because I was no longer the man they left behind. I was no longer the house sitter. I was a man standing in the full light of his name. John Walker, still standing, still walking, still here. The day I saw them again, I didn't plan it. I was walking down Calle del Mateos Gago, past the cathedral walls laced with centuries of shadow, when I heard Rebecca's voice before I saw her face. That particular tone, half command, half complaint, rang through the crowd like a fork scraping glass. "No, Tom, it was your job to confirm the hotel," she said, exasperated, clutching a map she wasn't reading. I stopped, not because I was startled, but because my body simply refused to keep moving. The man behind her, wearing cargo shorts and a baseball cap, was my son. Thinner than I remembered, his walk heavier, slower, but still his. And behind them trailed the girls. Olivia had grown taller, more self-assured. Sarah still had that slight stoop in her shoulders she carried since childhood, like she was always apologizing for something. They didn't see me. I was just another shirt in the sun, another shadow against the cobblestone. I watched them argue over directions. Then, as if fate had decided to throw me one more thread, they turned left down the side street where my cafe sat. My cafe, the one I came to each morning at 9 sharp. Same chair, same waiter, same soft clink of ceramic on tile. I didn't follow them. I just walked slowly behind, staying far enough to be invisible, close enough to witness. They passed my cafe without noticing. Rebecca was too distracted. Tom was too sunburned. The girls were glued to their phones. Not one of them looked up. Not one of them paused. I smiled. Not from spite, but from recognition. They were exactly who they had become. I stepped into the cafe, took my seat. My waiter, Arturo, nodded at me as always. "Cafe solo?" "Yes," I said. "And maybe a view today." He chuckled. He didn't ask. He just angled my chair toward the alley, toward where my family stood, arguing over whether they should head to the Alcazar now or stop for lunch. I sipped my coffee slowly, deliberately, like every drop held a truth I'd once overlooked. I watched as they finally settled on moving on. No consensus reached, just a shared weariness. They walked away, and with every step, something inside me settled like dust after a slammed door. That evening, I sat by the river, scarf tucked in my pocket like a secret, watching the light die slowly across the water. I thought about telling them I was here, walking up to them, calling out, letting them explain, apologize, or lie. I imagined the scene a dozen ways. Rebecca blinking, caught off guard. Tom stammering through excuses. The girls unsure if they should be glad or annoyed. But in every version, none of it mattered, because I had already arrived at the place they hadn't. I had arrived at peace. The next morning, I wrote a letter. Not to mail, just to say the things that no longer needed to be heard. Tom, I saw you. I saw all of you. You looked lost, even surrounded by maps. You looked hungry, even after lunch. You looked tired, even after sleeping in. I was once like that, too. When I believed value came from being useful, being present, and being silent. But I've learned something here in Barcelona. I've learned how to be heard without ever raising my voice. Sometimes distance is the only way to remember who we are without them. Without expectation, without noise. I don't hate you. I don't blame you. I just can't carry what was never mine to carry again. I folded the letter and placed it in the back of my journal. Maybe one day Liam would find it. Maybe not. Either way, it was written. Later that week, Arturo told me that a street performance was happening behind the basilica. He said it quietly, like a friend passing on a secret. I went, not because I needed entertainment, but because something inside me was still listening for a new rhythm. When I arrived, I didn't recognize the man playing guitar, but the voice, low, raw, undeniably American, came from a young man sitting near the fountain, narrating poetry between songs. His Spanish was terrible, but his voice carried something else, something I hadn't felt in years. Wonder without shame. I sat on a bench across from him, watched as he told stories about his grandfather, about learning how to fix a carburetor, about the sound of birds at sunrise on a Georgia porch. The crowd listened, not understanding every word, but feeling the weight of each pause. When he was done, I waited until the crowd drifted. Then I approached. "Your grandfather?" I said. "He sounds like someone worth knowing." The young man smiled. "He passed last spring." I nodded, but not really. He blinked, then nodded back. "Not really." We didn't exchange names, just truths. That was enough. Days passed like pages turning in the breeze. I bought fresh bread every morning, greeted the orange cat that slept near the pharmacy, watched flamenco dancers in alleyways, and old men play chess on milk crates. I wasn't waiting for anything anymore. Not a call, not forgiveness, not closure. I was simply living. And then one afternoon, it happened. A knock on the door of my guest house. I opened it slowly, expecting perhaps a clerk or Arturo with a gift. Instead, it was Sarah. She stood there in a pink sundress, eyes wide, lips parted like she wasn't sure what her mouth might say. "Grandpa?" I didn't speak. Not yet. I let the silence hold. "Are you really here?" I nodded once. "I am." She stepped inside, looked around the room. Her eyes landed on the yellow scarf, the one hanging from the back of the chair. "We saw it from the cafe that day. I wasn't sure, but I kept looking, hoping." I poured her a glass of water. She sat, folded her hands. "Dad doesn't know I'm here. Mom either. I needed to see if it was real. And now that you have?" I asked. She didn't answer, just reached into her bag and pulled out something small. A photo of us on the swings from years ago. Susan's handwriting on the back. Sarah's first push. Grandpa's steady hands. I touched the edge of the photo. "I remember that day." "So do I," she whispered. "Better than yesterday." She stayed for 3 hours. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. Sometimes the greatest apologies are unspoken. Just presence. Just breath shared in the same room. Before she left, she hugged me. A real one. The kind that says more than words ever could. I didn't ask her to tell the others. I didn't ask her to come back. I just said, "You'll always have a place near the river if you ever want to sit." She nodded. Then she was gone. That night, I didn't write in the journal. I didn't drink. I just sat in the courtyard, watching the stars blink awake. For the first time in years, I felt like a grandfather again. Not because of what I did, but because someone chose to remember. I was the last one standing under the arrival sign at Gate 3A. My coat draped neatly over one arm, my pie dish still warm, wrapped tight in 2 layers of foil. Around me, families were laughing, hugging, crying, claiming one another like luggage off a belt. And me? I was a question mark on the edge of their joy. No call, no text, just silence. I checked again. 48 minutes since we landed. My son said. Fly out, Dad. The kids miss you. It won't be the same without you. And yet, here I was alone, watching strangers be wanted. The glass doors slid open and closed over and over like a stage where I never got my cue. I sat on a bench near the newsstand and looked out at the pickup lane. I knew the truth before the hour mark hit. I wasn't forgotten. I was ignored. I wasn't left behind. I had been left out again. And that's when it hit me. Not the pain of abandonment. No. That had faded like a scar that no longer burns, but still tightens in the cold. What hit me was the peace. The strange, sober peace of knowing I owed them nothing more. I took a cab. The driver tried to make small talk. I smiled politely, gave short answers, let him assume I was just a tired old man visiting relatives who'd run late. I asked to be dropped off, not at their house, but 3 blocks away. I walked the rest. The same cracked sidewalk, the same maple tree with the roots lifting the concrete, the same chipped mailbox with peeling numbers. The number 43. Their home, their palace, their silence. But it wasn't mine anymore. I didn't knock. I didn't text. I walked past it like a tourist. I could see Rebecca through the living room window, moving briskly from one task to another, as if motion was virtue. She didn't glance up. She didn't see me. She never really did. And Tom, likely still at his office, fingers dancing over keyboards, saving the world from within his ego. My granddaughter's eyes fixed on their screens, faces lit blue by borrowed attention. I used to think I could fix this, that if I just waited long enough, softened my voice enough, gave enough, they would remember how to love me. But love without memory is just habit, and habits die when ignored. I kept walking. I didn't even look back. At the corner, I turned left, heading toward the train station. The scarf I'd tucked into my pocket back in Barcelona, I wore it now. Yellow as sunrise, a quiet flag. I bought a ticket to a small coastal town. No reason, just the name. Lagos, Portugal. Population barely enough to notice, but the name felt right. Like a place where things are left gently, not discarded cruelly. The train rocked me into reflection. I thought of Susan, how she used to sit by the window with her tea, humming old songs without realizing it. She believed that kindness was currency, and everyone was richer when it was shared. How she whispered once, "You're not made for noise, John. You're made for meaning." I had forgotten that for a long time. Let noise fill the void. But meaning had returned slowly, silently, and with it a kind of strength I didn't know survived inside me. Lagos was small, too small for secrets, too quiet for regret. I found a room above a bakery run by a widow named Helga, who wore purple sweaters and spoke in metaphors. She gave me the key and said, "All the ghosts here are polite." I liked that. I stayed. Walked the beach every morning. Wrote in a notebook I never planned to publish. I wrote not about them, but about me. About the way air tastes different when you're finally breathing for yourself. About how silence, once feared, becomes sacred when chosen. One morning, Helga asked if I'd help fix a shelf in the shop. I did. Word spread. Within weeks, I was fixing fences, mending windows, and repairing a chapel roof. They called me Mr. John. No one asked about my family. No one needed to. They saw the work of my hands. That was enough. And then on a gray Tuesday, a letter came, handwritten. No return address. Just, "To John, wherever you are." Helga handed it to me like it might crack open the world. I opened it at the kitchen table. "Dear Dad, It began. I know you saw the boarding passes. I know you canceled the return flights. We were stuck in Athens for 4 extra days, scrambling to fix everything. Rebecca was furious. The girls were confused. But me, I knew it was you. I knew at the moment the airline said our flights were voided. You always were the only one who could quietly turn a moment and sign out. I don't blame you. I think part of me admired it. The truth is, I don't know when we stopped seeing you as a person. Maybe after Mom died. Maybe before. I got used to you being there like furniture. And that's shameful. I wanted to tell you this. Olivia cried when we got home and saw your duffel was gone. Sarah wrote you a poem. They miss you. I miss you. But I understand that this is what peace looks like for you. If it is, I won't chase it. Just know I remember the man who taught me how to build birdhouses and throw a curveball, and I'm sorry for forgetting him. Love, Tom. I folded the letter, placed it inside the notebook, not because I needed to reread it, but because it belonged there, among the pages of a life reclaimed. Months passed. The town knew me now. Not as Tom's father. Not as Rebecca's responsibility. Just as John. The man who fixed what others threw away. Who walked the beach at dawn. Who sat under the lighthouse with a sandwich and stared out at waves that didn't care who did or didn't call. And then one Saturday Olivia came. She stood in the bakery, hair tied up, backpack slung over one shoulder. Helga called for me. I came out, wiping flour from my hands. Olivia smiled. "Grandpa," she said softly, "I found you." I nodded. "You did." She sat with me for hours, told me about school, about poetry, about how she started bringing Max on walks and talking to him like he was her diary. I listened, offered her a slice of lemon pie. She laughed and said, "This place smells like safety." She didn't ask me to come back. She didn't beg for explanations. She just said, "Can I visit again?" And I said, "Yes." That was all. That was everything. Some weeks she wrote, some weeks she didn't. But I never felt abandoned, because now it was on my terms, on my timeline, on my terrain. And when I walked the beach, I wasn't searching for what I'd lost. I was walking with what I'd found, myself, whole, scarred, free. So if you're listening to this, wondering whether silence can be a response, whether walking away can be love, whether revenge can be as soft as a scarf in your pocket, then know this. I didn't slam a door. I didn't scream. I simply chose to stop showing up to places where I wasn't seen. And somehow, in doing so, I was seen more clearly than ever.